Joining me now, PBS NewsHour White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff, author of Separated: Inside an American Tragedy, Jim Messina, manager of President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign, and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Welcome all. Yamiche, you've been on the firing line at White House news conferences. It's unimaginable the pressure that was on Kristen last night. President Trump trying to attack Biden through his son Hunter, but to my eye, he never really explained to a general audience what those unsubstantiated charges were all about. So unless you were in the Fox bubble, as he is every day, he wasn't really explaining the substance behind it that he alleges, and Biden was just ready to pounce. Let's listen.
You were getting a lot of money from Russia. They were paying you a lot of money, and they probably still are. But now, with what came out today, it's even worse. All of the emails, the horrible emails of the kind of money that you were raking in, you and your family.
I have not taken a single penny from any country whatsoever, ever. Number one. Number two, this is a president. I have released all of my tax returns, 22 years. Go look at them. 22 years of my tax return. You have not released a single solitary year of your tax return. What are you hiding?
Yamiche, by Biden pivoting to taxes, he immediately put the president on the defensive, explaining the tax issue, or trying to. And they got away from the Hunter issue, at least for then.
That's right. And first, I think it's important to say that Kristen Welker did such a great job moderating the debate. It was more controlled. It was more substantive. It was really both men being able to make their points, interrupt each other at times, but really stick to the issues. What we saw in President Trump was someone who was trying to launch this attack about Hunter Biden and corruption. And there was, in fact, that press conference with a business associate of Hunter Biden before the debate. And there was a lot of lead up saying that President Trump was going to make this a central part of his prosecution against Joe Biden. But when it came to the actual debate, that just didn't really hit that much. And it's because President Trump, in some places, was all over the place in terms of the way that he was talking about Joe Biden. He was making the point pretty consistently that he believes Joe Biden is corrupt, that he believes that there were foreign interference in the way that he came in front of the office in being vice president. But when you saw Joe Biden pivot to taxes, we saw President Trump have to say something that we were kind of surprised to see at the NewsHour, which is President Trump admitting, yeah, I did have a bank account in China. I did have business dealings in China. That was something that was not readily available. The New York Times broke that story, and then President Trump had to concede it. So what we saw the president do there was really be on the defense, and especially also when it came to the coronavirus. He had to start saying things like, we're rounding a corner. You're starting to see spikes go down in different states like Florida and Arizona. We now know, Andrea, that that's just not true. So I think the president was on the defense in a number of places.
And Jacob, the really extraordinary moment, which could be potentially the most damaging politically for the president, especially with those suburban women, was when he talked about the issue of the separated children. When Kristen asked him about, more than 500 children, as you've been reporting, still not with their parents from that policy at the border. Let's watch.
They got separated from their parents. And it makes us a laughing stock and violates every notion of who we are as a nation.
Let me ask you a follow-up question.
Kristen, they did it. We changed the policy.
Your response to that?
They did it. We changed.
Did not.
They built the cages. Who built the cages, Joe?
Let's talk about what we're talking about.
Who built the cages, Joe?
Let's talk about what we're talking about. What happened? Parents were ripped. Their kids were ripped from their arms and separated. And now they cannot find over 500 of sets of those parents, and those kids are alone. Nowhere to go. Nowhere to go. It's criminal. It's criminal.
Let me ask
Kristen,
you about
I will say this. They went down. We brought reporters, everything. They are so well taken care of. They're in facilities that were so clean.
Jacob, you were one of those reporters that went down there, well taken care of, and still separated from their parents. This was a lesson in empathy, and it could not have been more profoundly delivered by Joe Biden.
What the president said, Andrea, was preposterous. And can I just echo you and also Yamiche to say Kristen just did an extraordinary job, in particular on this issue, which we have not heard in any of the presidential debates or presidential debate or vice presidential debate, or really on the campaign trail thus far. Probably the signature issue, and definitely the signature retreat when it comes to Donald Trump's presidency, walking away from the separation of 5,500 children. The idea that they were well taken care of it just couldn't be further from the truth. As you said, I was one of the journalists invited inside the central processing station in McAllen, Texas, the epicenter of the policy, where kids were held in cages, under Mylar blankets, on concrete floors, supervised by security contractors in a watchtower after being taken from the arms of their parents. I will never forget seeing it with my own eyes for the rest of my life. But Physicians for Human Rights actually probably describes it much more concisely. They call it torture and say it meets the UN definition of torture. The American Academy of Pediatrics says it was government-sanctioned child abuse, and the President of the United States defines that as well taken care of.
And Jim Messina, Republicans are seizing on those comments I mentioned about transitioning out of fossil fuels to renewables, potentially damaging in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, Texas. Take a look.
Would you close down the oil
By the way, I
industry?
would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I will
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a big
because
statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly.
I see.
What's the political impact of that? Because I could counter-argue that it could be very helpful with millennials and young people who really care about hearing a candidate in a national debate for the first time really talking about transitioning out of fossil fuels and getting to renewables.
Yeah, Andrew, I agree with you. I don't think it's the moment that the Republicans needed to have. Let's be clear about this debate last night. You had an incumbent president who was down in the polls in every single battleground state. He had to have a game-changing moment. And I'm sorry, but there was just no game-changing moment. And if people think it was the oil comments, they clearly haven't talked to swing voters. I want to go back to your earlier point. I was watching focus groups with these swing voters, these undecided voters, and they were in tears when Joe Biden was talking about ripping their kids away from them. And this immigration moment was the one moment in the debate where you could see the swing voters start to kind of rethink about their vote. And you just don't see people crying in presidential debates, except for sometimes boredom. But last night, you saw two leaders. You saw Kristen Welker be the best debate moderator I can remember. And you saw Joe Biden understand exactly what he had to do. Donald Trump did not have the moment he had to have just 11 days before this election.
And speaking of Kristen's control, Michael, your thoughts about restoring the legitimacy of the debate process, which for a lot of us is very important for the American voters because of her impact. Let me play one clip.
Any country that interferes with us will, in fact, pay a price because they're affecting our sovereignty.
President Trump, same question to you. Let me ask the question. You're going to have 2 minutes to respond.
Millions of people would be dead right now.
President
We
Trump,
don't have
that's
a war,
30
and I have a
seconds.
good
Thank
relationship.
you. Vice President Biden, to you.
You never asked that question. And by the way, so far, I respect very much the way you're handling this, I have to say.
By the way.
But somebody should ask the question.
That was pretty amazing, given that he'd been attacking her on the campaign trail for days before this all started. And you know a lot from behind the scenes, the aplomb, the poise that she exhibited and kept them to answer their questions.
It was unbelievable. Kristen is all of our friend and hero. And last night she set, I think, an absolute standard for history of how you moderate a presidential debate. Last night was one of the best debates I think we've ever seen in American history, and the credit goes a lot to the moderator for keeping it so much on track and showing us new sides of these two guys that we haven't seen before.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.